information discussed in this presentation is current as of the date noted, is for informational purposes only, and does not intend to address the financial objectives, situations, and specific needs of any individual investor. Any information is for illustrative purposes only and is not intended to serve as investment, tax, or legal advice, since the availability and effectiveness of any strategy is dependent upon your individual facts and circumstances. Results will vary, and no suggestions made about how any specific solution or strategy will perform in reality. Now, today's topic, we're going to be covering a ton of information. If the questions get too specific, we may ask to shelf that question specifically and address it maybe after the presentation in a more one-on-one setting if the information is a little, if it crosses that confidentiality line in a group setting. Now, I'm going to introduce my friend Scott, who's going to tell us 3 different stories about 3 individuals to kick us off. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Will. So, 3 different retirement stories. First of all, my dad. My dad was a salesman in the grocery industry for his working career and was very successful, did a good job. And the company that he worked for decided that they were paying too much for their sales force. And they decided that they would go from about 400 salesmen nationwide down to about 200 nationwide. And there was a series of layoffs. And my dad did fine in the first few layoffs. But then finally his boss came to him and said, here's the choice. You can either retire and we can sweeten your retirement package, or we can lay you off. Well, he took the package. He was 59 and kind of forced into retirement. He and my mom moved to Florida. They bought a house. They lived, my dad lived for another 15 years, and they had a wonderful retirement. He spent his time doing some part-time work here and there, and then he got very involved in a civic organization, doing all sorts of charity work. And he loved doing that. But that was a forced retirement. Now, my father-in-law, he was a veterinarian by trade. And retirement? What? That was not him. He died at 84 years of age, and he was working 2 weeks before he passed away. He loved what he did. So when he got older, got to that retirement age, he limited the number of clients that he had. He had a number of clients, and he whittled that down, but he had people that he still served, farmers, loved doing it, kept his mind going, kept him going physically, but that was his retirement. And then there's my friend Butch. Butch worked in a tire factory, 12-hour shifts, and he would be on days for a month, and then he would go nights for a month. It was a grueling, hard job. It was amazing the number of people that worked in that plant that got into their 50s and started having heart attacks. And he could not wait to retire. He was counting down the days. Eventually, he got to that magic date. He had that union pension, and he was out of there. I tell these 3 stories because I think it's important for us to recognize that retirement looks different for everybody. Some people want to keep working. Some people can't wait to stop working. And then there are some that are kind of forced into retirement. And because of this differentiation, because everybody has a very unique retirement idea or retirement plan or how it works out, when we do retirement planning, we want to be very individualized. How can we help person A figure out what they're going to do in retirement? So we can have the next slide here. This is a map of the United States. You've got New York up in the corner there. Average age for retirees in the state of New York is 64. All these different states have a different number. You'll notice on the left-hand side there, countries. United States has one of the older retirement ages of different countries around the world. But these are the dates when people are retired. And next. So retirement in the modern era. Over on the right-hand side, you'll notice that people are getting older and living longer, and yet the new youth population is relatively flat. In other words, Americans aren't having as many babies as they used to have. But I want to give a little context to this slide here. Prior to the late 1800s, only the wealthy retired in America. Most folks just kept on working until they were too infirm to do any work, or they just died. In 1890, the US government decided to start giving pensions to disabled Union Civil War veterans who were over 60 years of age, or their widows. By 1904, under Teddy Roosevelt, they removed the disability so that all veterans received pensions. By 1932, 17 of the 48 states at that time started having old age pensions for people in their state. Then you get to 1935 with the passing of the Social Security Act. 1937, Social Security Administration started giving lump sum payments to some folks, and by 1940, the monthly check to retirees started. Now we need to remember that that took place during the Depression. You have lots of folks out of work, and one of the intentions of the government is to move older folks out of the workforce so that we can create jobs for younger people. 1875, backing up just a little bit, the first pension from a private company. American Express Corporation started creating pensions for their employees. By the 1930s, roughly 15% of people that worked in the United States had a pension that they could look forward to. It was a way for companies to hold on to workers. You work for us for a period of time, you'll get to a point where we can support you for the rest of your days. Then we're going to jump ahead to the 1970s. Two big laws that were passed. First of all, the creation of individual retirement accounts, 1974, and then 1978, the first 401k. Well, with IRAs and 401ks, companies began to withdraw the idea of pensions. Frankly, today there are very few companies that have pensions other than folks that are working for a government in some way. So that really brings us to where we are today. It used to be that you worked for a company for much of your life, they took care of you in old age. Those days really are gone for the most part. People are responsible for their own retirement and preparing for it financially. So we can have the next slide. Do you believe you've achieved your dream retirement situation? What strikes me about this particular slide, and by the way, we have a series of slides that are taken from a consumer affairs survey of 1,000 Americans that was done in 2022. What strikes me here is that only 14% of the people surveyed really think they're on track for the kind of retirement they want. For most people, either no, they're not ready, or maybe we're getting there. And next slide, please. Top sources of happiness during retirement. People like to do hobbies, their spouse, financial stability. They've got money set aside, they can kind of do whatever they want to. Some people want to be close to family during retirement. Some people enjoy an active lifestyle. They want to get out and do things that they haven't had time to do previously. And you've got traveling, social opportunities, dream home and location. Some people have got this idea, I'm going to move to whatever place and build myself this great retirement home. And then how are you spending your retirement savings? frankly, you're going to spend money in retirement the same way you spend money now. You're going to, same kinds of things, living expenses, food, car, healthcare, hobbies and entertainment, do some traveling, gifts and donations. And then I thought that interesting, a lot of folks are still supporting children, dependents, other relatives, even in their retirement years. The top regrets of retirees. There's a whole list here. Frankly, I want to move on from the list. Here's why. Regret, and we all have regrets. Something we didn't do in the past or something we did in the past that we shouldn't have done. We all have regrets. There's nothing I can do about regrets. They're in the past. They've taken care of themselves. What I can do is make changes today for the future. So we'll kind of leave the regrets along and move on to the next slide. What age do you want to retire? And then how much our Americans currently have saved for retirement? The baby boomers, who are closest to retirement, have a little over $400,000 saved. And then the other generations, the Gen X, the millennials, the Gen Z, significantly less saved up for retirement. Do you plan to work during retirement?
The baby boomer one, is that combined or single?
Excuse me?
The baby boomer savings, is that two people or one person?
That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that. I'm guessing individuals, but I don't know that for sure. Do you plan to work during retirement? Only 12% of people say no. Most folks are going to do some sort of work in retirement, and whether it be for extra income, and for some people just to remain social and active, just to get out and do something with their lives. I know my dad, I told you he did a couple of part-time jobs. One of them was on a golf course. He loved it. And he got to check people in as they started their round, and he just thought that was great for him. If you plan to work during retirement by generation, you've got different spreads there of what people are thinking. And then the next slide, please. What age do you want to retire? I think this slide is really interesting. You'll notice 60 or younger, the baby boomers, very small percentage of them think they can retire before they're 60 or 60 or younger. You look on the other end, 61 or older, 75% of baby boomers are saying it's going to be 61 or later before I can retire. What happens is you get closer to retirement, reality sets in. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I don't have enough money to be able to do all the things I want to do in retirement. Maybe I need to work another year or 5 years before I can afford the kind of retirement that I'm thinking of. So next, please. Percentage of those confident they're on track to retire at their desired age. Again, not a whole lot of confidence that people are ready to retire. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jake here, and he's going to take us through the next part here.
Now that we've gone through the history, the different types of retirement, we're going to look at kind of the meat and potatoes of what makes up your retirement. So as you can see here, there's 4 main parts. Each have their own benefits and whatnot to your retirement. So we've got consumer choices, estate, finances, and quality of life. It's important to remember that all of these make a whole. If there's one part lacking, if there's one part not working towards the same goal, there's going to be problems. You can see it with an engine. If you've got one part that's not quite working right, your car's not going to go anywhere and you're not going to go anywhere. So looking specifically at each of the sections and what's within them, we're going to go through each of these in the next couple of slides. But for consumer choices, we've got earnings, consumer spending, saving habits, wants and needs, physical and mental health. Then we've got finances. So that's your retirement savings, your cash flow, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and taxes. And if you have, we're going to briefly touch on taxes today, but if you have more questions, our last presentation of this series was all about taxes, so that'll give you some good information. Quality of life, that's your bucket list, volunteering, serving, whatever your idea of a good retirement is. And last, we've got estates. We're going to briefly touch on this as well, but our next presentation is going to go into more depth on both of those topics. So here's a couple of quotes that deal with consumer choices. I'm less worried about who said them and more about what's said in the quotes. So David Suzuki said, "Our personal consumer choices have ecological, social, and spiritual consequences. It's time to re-examine some of our deeply held notions that underlie our lifestyles." John C. Maxwell said, "Life is a matter of choices, and every choice you make makes you." Richard Norris says, "Your tomorrow is determined by your today." So in all these quotes, consumer choices have a great impact on what your future is going to look like, and all of the choices you make will make you. So consumer choices. So before we get into each of these, we are creatures of habit. That's just a commonality between all of us. And a good way I like putting this is my grandfather. My grandfather growing up, he was in the generation where when you were 10, 11, 12, you started working. However you could help, you started working. And from there, he became a teacher. He had a farm with some cattle and whatnot. And then his retirement came. So he wanted to slow down teaching, start getting rid of the cattle. It just started becoming too much for him. Well, to this day, 20 years later, he still teaches every once in a while, every so often these classes. And even though he has no more cattle, he's constantly out on his acreage, has several acres, mowing, weed whacking, planting new trees, taking old trees down, chopping wood, and he just will not stop moving. And so that's where those consumer choices kind of build what your retirement's going to look like, positive or negative. So earnings, consumer spending, saving habits, mental and physical health, and then your wants and needs. So now we're going to look at your finances. So this is the big area where there's a lot of questions usually, as a lot of this can get pretty complicated. So we're going to do a pretty high level look at it, and then if you have any more questions at the end, you can certainly go over them. So a lot of you might recognize these, whether it's your personal accounts that you've set up for yourself or accounts through your company. So there's the IRAs, the 401k, 403b, 457, a lot of alphabet soup. And then depending on the type of plan, you have employer contributions, you have your HSAs, dividend and interest yielding accounts, so those are your taxable accounts, maybe your brokerage accounts, and then you have annuities. The last part I really want to stress is the pre-tax and the post-tax. So having these two buckets of income in retirement can be a very, very advantage towards your retirement. So to give an example, say you're spending same amount of money each year, but then an unexpected expense comes up. You need $100,000 extra. So you're already at the level of income you're at, so the same level of taxes you've been at throughout retirement. But this extra $100,000, depending on what bucket it could be, could raise your taxes a lot. And some of that money that you're taking out could get reduced by 20, 30, 40%, depending on what tax brackets you are. To have both of these buckets, you can pull a portion from pre-tax, a portion from post-tax, and then you're kind of just evening out the tax burden you're going to have on that additional income that you need to retire. So now we're going to look at your cash flow, so money in, money out, income, pension, Social Security, RMDs, which are required minimum distributions, your W-2, your 1099, your 1099 interest, and self-employment. So in essence, there's three main categories of income. That's your active, that's the money you earn, you work for. There's the passive, that's money you're not really participating in, or the businesses you're not really participating in, but you're still receiving money from it. And then third, there's the investment income. So that's your interest, your dividends, your capital gains, whatnot. And then on the other side of that, there's the money out. So those are your expenses, P&I payments, utilities, lifestyle, taxes, insurance, maintenance. And then also in that, there's three main categories. There's fixed. Those are the ones that are pretty steady. You're expecting them every month, every year. There's not going to be much change. That's your mortgage, your insurances, and whatnot. So next, then there's variable. Those are your recurring expenses, but there usually is a little bit of change depending on the timing. A great example is groceries. Maybe your kids or your family comes into town for a week or two. Groceries are going to go way up. Another example is your entertainment. During COVID, all of our entertainment expenses went pretty way down, if not to zero. And now that COVID's over, everyone wants a go grab drinks, go grab food, go to the movies, go to sporting events, and then it goes right back up. And then lastly, we've got irregular. Those are those one-off expenses you can't really plan for in your budget. The first thing that comes to my mind is a health problem, whether it be you or an animal. Those are pretty unexpected. There's no way to really plan for them, but when they happen, they need to be accounted for. So now we're going to get into Social Security. So a lot of people know Social Security is retirement income. You get a check from the government. That's good. We're going to get into the different, how it's funded, some different aspects about it. So how it is funded. It's funded through your payroll taxes. It's 6.2% by the employee and then 6.2% by the employer, up to the third amount, which is $160,200. So, and then if you're self-employed, that changes a little bit, but that's a whole nother presentation in itself. And so how it's calculated. So all workers have to have 40 quarters of coverage to get full coverage under Social Security. And each quarter is earnings of 1,640 currently in 2023 is one quarter. While that sounds like a very low amount, the max you can make, the max amount of quarters you can earn in 1 year is 4. Whether you make $1 million, whether you make $20,000, the maximum you can make in quarters per year is 4. And then benefits are calculated using your 35 highest years of income. That's where a lot of planning can come into play. Depending on your work history in those last 35 years, it could be worth it to work that extra year or two to remove those 2 low earning years and potentially boost your Social Security benefits up. And then they can be increasing both ways, higher income in recent years, and then deferral of benefits. So we're going to get into the next slide, your full retirement age and the different timing of your Social Security. So you can be as eligible as early as 62, and then as we saw in this prior slide, you can defer it up until age 70. Depending on your birth year, you can see your full retirement age. So that's when you get your benefits. If you delay them, the government's going to reward you. They're going to bump up your benefits slightly. And then if you take it earlier, they're going to ding you. They're going to reduce your benefits slightly depending on how early or how late you take it. So there are widow and widower benefits for Social Security and also for divorced spouses. There are a lot of requirements, specific requirements to meet these buckets and be able to qualify for this income. But just to know that they're available is worth it. And then for widowers and widowers, you can begin at age 60 in certain circumstances. And then divorced spouses, once you meet all of those, you could be able to get it at least age 62. So common mistakes. So a while ago, you could use to kind of double dip and increase your benefits while receiving your other benefits. The government realized that, they got rid of that, you can no longer do that. So now, once you apply for Social Security, you're eligible for one or the other, whichever one's higher, between spousal benefits and then your own benefits. And then also, working in retirement can cause changes in your Social Security. And as we've seen, retirement looks different for everyone, and people have been working longer, and this is an important reminder to make sure it's not affecting your Social Security negative. And then it's always best to grow your maximum benefits. So that comes with the territory that it's maximum benefits based on your personal situation. And this is where a lot of planning can come in with Social Security analysis. So depending on your assumptions and your health and your how long you plan to live and your family health history and whatnot, depending, it might be worth it to take that decreased benefit earlier so that you get the maximum benefits at the time that you assume that you'll pass. And then if you plan to live longer, if everyone in your family tends to live till age 100, it'd be worth it to potentially delay those benefits until age 70 so that you're getting the maximum benefit upon your personal situation. And now I'm going to let Scott take over for Medicare and Medicaid.
Thank you, Jacob. That's a tremendous amount of information. And we have more for you. Retirement can be incredibly complicated. there's just a lot of moving parts. There's a lot going on. When we get to the end of our presentation here, we're going to do a little bit of workshop where you can kind of help us plan out a retirement. I'm going to move on to Medicare. For most people, 65 years of age and older, Medicare is the government program that gives you your health care. Now, for folks that continue to work past 65, they may still get their employer-sponsored health care. But for most folks, it's going to be Medicare. There are a number of rules on when to sign up for Medicare. Basically, you've got a 7-month window. The 3 months before you turn 65, the month you turn 65, and the 3 months after you turn 65 to sign up for Medicare. And if you could have the next slide, please. Medicare really has been described as an alphabet soup. Lots of letters, and they have different parts to them. So the first part of Medicare is Part A Medicare. Primarily, the easiest way to look at this is covering hospitals. You get sick, you end up in the hospital, your Part A is going to cover the costs that you incur when you're in the hospital. There are some benefit periods that start the day after you're admitted. There are some rules that go along with how long you can get skilled nursing care after you get out of the hospital. I'm going to have the next slide, please. And then there's Medicare Part B. Part B is, think doctors, going to your doctor. So Part A is hospital. Part B is doctors, medical supplies, other types of medical care that is going on. And all of these are spelled out very specifically in all of the Medicare literature that you can go to the Medicare website and find. Next slide, please. Part D. This is easy. D for drugs. Prescriptions. Most folks, when they get to their senior years, are going to be on some sort of medication. And those medications can be pricey. So there are a number of Medicare Part D plans that you can purchase. Typically, the easiest way to do this, and you can do all this online, is kind of go and type in all the medications you're taking, and then it will point out plans that would be most cost effective for you. Some of these plans are really inexpensive, $8, $10 a month. Some of them can get very expensive. So one of the things that we do for our clients, we review this every year just to make sure that our clients have the best possible coverage at the lowest cost price. Next, please. Okay, so the last letter is Part C, which is a Medicare Advantage plan. Medicare itself has holes in it. It doesn't cover absolutely everything. So there's a couple of different ways that you can fill those holes. One of them is a Medicare Advantage plan. Come the fall, you will see advertisements for Medicare Advantage plans every day, all day long. The other option is what's called a Medigap plan. And they are different in the ways they are set up. Medigap plans tend to be more expensive, but they tend to cover more, where Medicare Advantage plans tend to be less expensive on a monthly basis, but they can be quite pricey if you were to get sick and have to take care of the co-pays and whatnot. So depending on your health and your particular situation, you may want to weigh out which would be the better choice for you. Again, that's something that we help our clients work through. Next, please.
Can I ask a question though?
Oh, sure.
So, say you pick a plan.
Yes.
Something happens to you during the course of the year where it changes. Do you get to change it, or are you stuck with that until sign up time again?
You stick with a plan for a year. So the Medigap plans, typically what we try to advise our clients to do, sign up for a plan and then you just stay on it for the rest of your life. The Medicare Advantage plans, you can switch from one year to the next to find a better plan that suits you.
But you have to wait a year. You can't.
Yes, it is open enrollment every fall. Thank you for the question. And a little bit more about Medicare Advantage plans, how they function. These are insurance companies that have agreed with Medicare that they're going to pick up and pay for certain procedures and whatnot, and they are reimbursed by the government for doing that. Next, please. And then there is Medicaid. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Medicaid. It is designed for folks with low income, and it is a government program. Typically, you have to spend down your resources to be able to qualify for Medicaid, but it is available, and you may have a family member that needs to take advantage of this program. Then we go on to taxes in retirement. Some people are surprised to find out that Uncle Sam is going to tax your Social Security. Now, that wasn't always the case, but it is the case now. If you pass certain income thresholds, the government will tax your Social Security. So for most people, you're going to still pay income tax on your Social Security benefits. Then there's pensions that you receive. For those of you that have a pension in the future, you'll still pay taxes on that. And then your tax-deferred investments. Again, this is an area where people are kind of surprised. You put some money away in a 401k through your employer or a traditional IRA on your own, and you've let that sit for a number of years, and you're retired and you're ready to start taking that money out. Uncle Sam wants a cut. Because when you put the money in, you didn't pay taxes on it. So now that you're taking it out, you do have to pay taxes on it. So that's traditional IRA, some annuities, 401k, or a 403b. 403bs are typically for nonprofit organizations. It's their way of taking care of their employees. Any type of account that you're getting interest or dividend on, that interest and dividend you're going to pay tax on. Yes, ma'am.
So your 401ks, they're taxing everything, not just what you contributed? Because
yes.
You have 401k that you've interest, you have stocks and all that, real estate investments, and they're going to tax all that, not just what your contribution is.
Correct. So you get the tax break when you put the money in, whatever amount you put in, but it's going to grow over time, and they're going to tax you as you take it out. So just what you take out for the year, you get taxed on. So
whatever you saved up, you can automatically assume it's a 30% reduction. So
depending on what your tax bracket is, yes. Yeah, because the states also usually want to take their cut also. And then you have capital gains tax. If you are selling stocks or bonds, if you've made money, that's a good thing. The government still wants their share. If you have sold a piece of property, sometimes people have bought a house when they were very young. They get to retirement age. They decide, I don't want to live in this house anymore. I'm going to sell this house. Well, for an individual, you've got a $250,000 exclusion that you don't have to pay tax on of the gain. For a married couple, it goes up to $500,000, but it is certainly possible that if you bought your house long ago at a very low price and are in a part of the country where real estate has just skyrocketed, you could have a capital gains tax on the sale of your house that you may have to pay tax on. Then mutual funds. If you've got an investment account with mutual funds and you're making money in that account, they're going to tax that also. Next, please. So, some tax hacks, some ways to minimize the taxes that you're paying. First of all, there's a gift exclusion. If you make large gifts to people, you have to pay a gift tax on that. But for an individual, you've got $17,000 a year per person that you can give and not have to pay a gift tax on. If you're a married couple, you can combine them, $34,000 a year per person that you can give. And then there's the clustering. Let's say you've decided you're going to give some money every year to either your church or charity of your choice. But what you're giving is not enough to move you from the standard deduction to an itemized deduction. If you group several years worth of that giving into 1 year, you might be able to take a itemized deduction in that 1 year you're giving the gift. You're still giving the same amount, you've just combined it into 1 year so that you can itemize your deductions. You can also donate appreciated stock to charities of your choice, and there's a dual benefit there. The gift is deductible, and then there's no capital gains tax on the money that you would have paid in the gain of that stock. And then also, when you get to, right now it's 73, you've got an RMD, a required minimum distribution, an IRA. If you're going to give anyway to a charity or to your church, if you give out of that IRA, you can get a tax benefit for that. And that's a wonderful way for folks who are giving anyway to get a little bit on the side for themselves as a tax benefit. And then there are Roth conversions. For some people who retire early, they have no income, they have an opportunity to take some of their 401k money or their IRA money and convert it to a Roth account, which they'll pay some tax on when they do the conversion, but Roths will grow continually, and you don't have to pay any tax when you pull the money out of a Roth, as long as you're over 59 and a half and the Roth has been there for 5 years or more. So sometimes those early retirement years are a wonderful year for Roth conversions to save you some tax money. And then optimizing your tax bracket. Jacob kind of talked about that a minute ago with the buckets. If you need money for some purchase, trying to figure out where to take that money out so that you can minimize the amount of tax you pay. Next, please. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Jacob again.
So now we're in the third section of our 4-section pie, pretty much for your retirement. And now we're going to look at estate. So before we get to any of this, this is the way I learned it, and I thought it was pretty useful. So there's 3 main ways to transfer assets through your estate. So one is through contract. That's your accounts. That's your beneficiary designations with your accounts, whether it's a brokerage or retirement account, whatever it may be. That's one way. Another way is through operation of law. So that's your trust. And that is also the titling of your assets. Depending on what your assets are titled, there could be a survivorship clause where it passes immediately to one person. So if that's the case, it will go right to that person. And then the last is kind of the catch-all. Whatever's not already transferred in those first 2 is probate. And what deals with all the assets in probate? That's your will. So this states how a person wishes to distribute your assets upon your death. And then the next slide, we're getting to some of the problems that arise from each of these documents. So next is your healthcare proxy. This is a person you designate to make healthcare decisions for you in the event you were unable to. Whatever the case may be, an example is maybe you're in a coma. This is the person that will make those decisions for you. And then your power of attorney is very similar, except it deals on the financial side. So if you're in that coma and your bills need to be paid, all this stuff needs to be taken care of on the financial side, this is the person that will be able to do it. Next slide, please. So then here are where we come to common mistakes. So a will by itself leaves many holes in managing one estates. Like I talked about, the will is kind of the catch-all for the assets that are not already transferred in the other two ways. Ignoring the importance of the beneficiary designations, that's that contract, those accounts and the beneficiaries marked on that account. And now, more than ever, your digital information. It can be very hard to track down passwords and account information, especially when people have several different banks, several different accounts. It's very important to make sure this is easily accessible for whoever needs it. And then leaving surprises without communicating or coordinating. We know this can be a very hard conversation, but a lot of this stuff is very important. And the last thing you want to do during a time like this is to be fighting, arguing, searching for any of this documents or any of this information. And then lastly, forgetting about pet care. That can be a big burden for certain people and certain families to take on an extra pet or an extra 2 or 3, depending on your situation. So with your healthcare proxy, it's not just for the elderly. As we know, accidents can happen, problems can come up anytime, and you always want to make sure this is there for you and your family members to make sure you're taken care of in the event you can't take care for yourself. Not discussing wishes with your agent. This can be very important. It's going to be very hard for a person to kind of just get this sprung on them, especially when something like this would happen. And not addressing religious considerations, not having it readily available. Again, searching for it in a time like this, it's not something you want to be doing. And this does not include any financial decisions. This is strictly for healthcare decisions. Your power of attorney, no backup agent. If one person's unavailable or doesn't want to take over the power, not having a backup could leave some problems for your financial situation. Power is too limiting. They don't have enough access to be able to do what's needed of them. Joint accounts is a loophole, and then POA is not the same as an executor. So power of attorney expires at one's death. So once the individual is dead, your power is gone. And that's when the executor takes over. And then the biggest mistakes for all three, not having them all, the probate process. This can be a very time-consuming process and a very expensive process. And this can cause problems with families. This is essentially leaving all of your assets and the court decides who they go to. You may not want that, so that's the importance of having these documents and making sure they're in place. Not updating life changes. A common example is people have an extra kid and then they don't think about it updating their estate plan. That can be a big problem. Or 15 years ago, you had a best friend, maybe a groomsman that you had as your power of attorney or healthcare proxy. Well, have you talked to him in the past 5 years? No, you should probably get that changed. Not reviewing them regularly, just with law changes and language changes. Not signing them. This will not have them in effect, and essentially they'll just be a sheet of paper. And then not having them accessible. You want to make sure everyone knows where they are so that in the time of need, everything's ready and everyone's aware of what's going to happen. So the key takeaways. So as we talked about with the operation of law and the contract, those beneficiary designations or those survivorship clauses will trump what's listed in your will. Designated benefits, go to those designates faster. It's a much easier process. And it doesn't have to be a person. It can be a trust you set up. It could be an organization, a charitable organization. And if you do have charitable intentions, there are a lot of very cool tools that you can use to get a good benefit from that charitable giving. And then 10-year rule for those inheriting IRAs. So depending on your relationship to the deceased, You could have a 10-year rule, which is you have to draw down the account within that 10 years. That can cause a lot of problems for one's taxable tax situation. That's the next bullet, the tax implications of that person receiving those assets, the titling of the assets, and then again, the last presentation will go with the legacy and estate planning in much more depth. So now we're in our last section, that's the quality of life. Again, we actually have the joy of having the first quote, the person who gave the first quote in attendance today, Tom Snow. He's been an advisor with John Geoman for a long time, and I heard this.
Longer than he's been alive.
And I actually have heard this many times throughout the August. I never knew exactly where it came from until this slide. But so it's important that we retire to something and not just from something. That can be a big question for people when they retire. Is they get to retirement, they're so happy not to work, and then a month goes by, a couple weeks, a couple more months, and you have no idea what you're doing. You're just bored out of your mind, and you need to make sure you have something that you're going to do during that retirement. And then Dr. Cuddy has two good quotes here. Volunteering or working part-time can add value and meaning now that you're not working. It's not uncommon for retirees to face an identity crisis. You got to stay involved. And this is a great one. Spend your money, make your bucket list a priority, care for your family all your lives. Now you've built up all of this money and you've got your bucket list. Make it a priority. Make sure you're spending your money that you earn throughout your life. And then be intentional, especially during retirement. You have to be very intentional and careful with your choices, your money, your accounts, because unfortunately you don't have the luxury of time to recoup those losses. For example, if my portfolio went down 30%, I might be a little disappointed, but I also have another 40, 50 years to recoup that balance and rebuild my portfolio. If you're in retirement and it drops 30%, that can cause a lot of issues for a lot of your planning. And so long-term care, this is when you can no longer care for yourself. This is also in the quality of life, is what your plans are for when you can't take care of yourself. There's a bunch of different kinds depending on your needs, and this can be very helpful for people depending on what your thoughts are on this term of your life.
So I have a couple of slides here just to show you how we as a firm handle retirement. We do lots of retirement plans for folks. This is just a chart off of a plan that we did for a fictitious client. It's not a real person, so none of this information is a real person. But just to give an idea of what their income would be like in retirement and how they're spending down their retirement. Next slide, please. We look at cash flow. We look at where money is coming in and then where money is going out. With every client, we actually will sit down and try to get a year's worth of financial data so that we can look and crunch the numbers and see where people are actually spending money. And then we kind of project that forward on how they're going to spend in retirement. Next, please. Then we've got retirement income and expenses. Again, we chart this all out, where money is coming in, and then the expenses. And then the next slide, please. Retirement needs versus abilities. In this particular fictitious client, we get to the point where they've got a shortfall. They don't have enough money saved up for retirement yet. And we would work with them to try to restructure what they're doing so that they are ready to be able to retire.